You'll see. That's you.
Okay. Well, can I wish you all a warm welcome from Table Tennis Scotland as we enter Table Tennis Zoomcast number 36. Our guests tonight have been handpicked by John McCulloch, who is a coach, player, administrator, and a wonderful writer. They're all from the Old Timers group. They are players who excelled to national level and then left the game far too early. They are John Muir and Archie McCulloch. Good evening, gents. Welcome to our Zoomcast.
Good evening.
Good. Once again, Mark Lundberg, national player and selector, will be casting his expert eye on your CVs and asking you all the difficult questions. Matt Norbury, again, who's just gone off screen, who I forgot to mention last week, will be taking your responses via the chat line, and if anything comes on the email as well. Mark, have we got any birthdays?
Well, we're referring to him as Old John tonight, aren't we, Dave? So John McCulloch's birthday on Friday. So for the purpose of our viewers tonight, he is Old John, but he's another year older on Friday. So happy birthday when it comes along on Friday, John.
Thank you.
Right, well, let's start off with birthday boy. Firstly, John, when you rang me a few weeks ago saying you wanted this topic, why this topic and why these two players?
Well, firstly, over the last few years, I've become a bit of a silver surfer. And over the last year, more of a super silver surfer. And more recently, I've started looking into a site in TT Old Timers. And I've come across a lot of names that have been sitting at the back of my memory for quite some time, and started thinking to myself, whatever happened to them? Here's their names just showing up after all these years. Anyway, that set me thinking, and I put my coach's hat on, and I thought, if I coached some of these people that finished early, would I be upset? Yes. Then I started to think to myself, was it something I said, or was it something I did? I gave that serious consideration for all of it, maybe 2 seconds, and decided it couldn't possibly be. It must be something which is in their makeup. The thing about it is, table tennis is an individual sport, but it's not really an individual pastime. You can play golf as an individual. You can decide that you're going to take up athletics, and in theory could become one of the world's top runners. Similarly with golf, but in theory you could never make the top echelons of table tennis without having someone at your side, at your back, or in front of you. So I'm back to the same thing. Would I feel a bit upset? Yes. But here again, wouldn't the person's club, wouldn't the person's national body be upset? I mean, the argument might come from the player who's just retired. You realise how much I've put into this. I've given everything. But if they think about it themselves, so is their coach probably. And it's an unpaid job. They've done it as a volunteer to make someone good at something. So I looked down the list and I thought, if we have a chat about this, who would I choose? I come up with 3 or 4 names. And the 3 or 4 names I came across included Archie. And I thought, I've seen that name before. I thought, wait a minute. Yes, I got a Christmas card last year. That's probably where I saw it. Then realised it was my own brother. And so I thought, maybe I could approach him. Would he take it kindly? Then I thought to myself again, you know, we all look up to our big brothers, don't we? So I'll ask Archie. Now, in telling you this story, I should tell you I don't have a big brother to look up to, but Archie certainly does. He has 2. So I had a word with Archie, and yes, he was up for it. So it meant I'd found my first volunteer is what I meant to say. My first volunteer. Went down the list again, came across someone I never played against, I had never spoken to until tonight. But in all honesty, we've actually communicated quite significantly over the last 2 or 3 years, telling tales about past times, talking through some sad times that we've both gone through. But we found that we've taken to each other. I think John might disagree with me, but John kindly agreed as well. The other thing about it was John and Archie seemed to be good friends at one point. And I thought, well, if we had them both, they would bounce off each other. But even if they didn't, what would come of tonight? One thing for certain, there must be a story to be told in North Korea to fall back on. If their story doesn't interest, I'm sure there's something in North Korea. Rumour has it, flags went out in North Korea as they left. Anyway, that was my thinking, David. So I'll leave them to you.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well done. Thank you, John. That was a great introduction. Right, I'm going to go to young John, who doesn't have a birthday this week. And I'm not going to go straight into his backstory, but he's obviously got himself connected with this old timers group. Can you tell us something about this old timers group, John? And then I've got another question before we go on to your backstory.
Okay. I think the TT Old Timers Facebook page was set up maybe 6 or 7 months ago in the middle of your lockdown. And out here in Botswana, we've also had a couple of lockdowns, but maybe not as severe as you've experienced in the UK. But the idea was to get people from who had either played or participated in some way, or umpired or coached or been involved in the sport from the 1970s and I guess into the 1980s. And maybe, Mr. McCulloch, maybe before that, a little bit before that, okay? So, and there's a few players in the group. I think the group is about 80 people now, 70 or 80. And there's a few people from the north of England. And if we remember rightly, a lot of the guys used to come up from Sunderland and other places and win our tournaments certainly in the 1970s and bring up the standards. So the likes of Ian Svensson and a couple of others, Tony Gelder, are in that group now. So it was a few, I would hate to say like-minded people, but yeah, people who grew up playing table tennis around the same era.
Brilliant. Okay, John, before we go to your backstory, can you tell us a little, I think, did I mention John is from Botswana? He's it's not from Botswana, but he's living there right now. And I think that's our furthest guest, Mark, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we were discussing off air, Dave. I think Sweden beforehand.
Yes, Red Sweden.
But yeah, I think Botswana wins. So I think our challenge now is where can we go next? But yeah, pleasure to have you on, John, especially in such a far-flung location.
Brilliant. John, before we go on your backstory, can you tell the guests a little bit about table tennis in Zimbabwe and where you are?
So I left UK in beginning of 1983 for Zimbabwe, and I'd kind of given up, I think a little bit like Archie, a couple of years before that, become a bit discouraged for whatever reason. And I went to work in Zimbabwe, and I ended up living there for 4 years. And it wasn't really my intention to play table tennis, not initially. And then I discovered that the owner of the IT business that I joined sort of called me across this office one day just after I'd arrived and showed me an article, I think from the Scotsman, where there was a picture of me and some article about me in the Scotsman about table tennis. And he said, it was a Friday, and he said, the top 10 in the country are playing tonight, or over the weekend. There's a top 10 table tennis tournament, and you need to go and play in it, yeah? And I hadn't played for 2 or 3 years. So I went to practice on the Friday night because he had insisted that I go and play. And I played in that tournament on the Saturday and Sunday. And I won the Zimbabwe top 12. So from there, what we did, there was a Finnish guy called Matti Vainio, who's also, I think he was number 6 or 5 junior in Finland about the same time as Archie and myself were playing. And he was working out in Zimbabwe. And we set up a coaching club, if you like, where we went to the townships and we trained hundreds and hundreds of talented young local kids to play table tennis. And the long and the short of it was that the top 10 within about 3 years was all these newcomers that we'd taught from scratch. So it was quite a nice story, and it was that was my only time I really coached people, but it was very satisfying.
Yeah, I'm just going to push you a little bit again on this, John, because I said off here that I coached in Ethiopia and I've also coached in Nigeria. And one of the problems has been equipment. And when we was doing the throw up for a service practice, we didn't have enough table tennis balls, so we used stones to do the service. So what was the equipment like?
Well,
it's like
it was the same issue to start with. So what we did, we had a colleague who was the Austrian ambassador, who I believe used to coach the Austrian table tennis team, and he was also involved in organizing stuff. And we put some adverts in European table tennis magazines for second-hand equipment, shoes, anything they could send. And they gathered a crate of stuff from all over Europe, Finland, from Sweden, some stuff came from the UK. And this crate arrived out in Zimbabwe with all sorts of things that people had given away. And of course, it immediately got seized by customs. So we had to use diplomatic channels to get this stuff through customs and into the hands of these youngsters. So yeah, equipment was a real challenge. And we go out to this Seke township on a Saturday morning, and there were 4 tables and maybe 200 kids wanting to play. So it was quite a challenge, but I must say people in the UK and Europe did help out and sent out a whole pile of stuff to us, and we made good use of it.
Excellent. What a wonderful story. What a wonderful story. Right. Okay, then, John, let's take you back to the Granite City. And I think that's where you started your table tennis career. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes. Yeah.
But I am going to interrupt you. You'll find out I do that a lot, because in your CV, we're going to come on to that, but you did say I beat my coach, but you didn't name your coach.
Brian Morgan.
Oh, Brian was your. Oh, right. I didn't really. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Let's go to your backstory then. So, Granite City, and somehow you fell into table tennis.
So I was like probably most young kids, keen on football, and I played a lot of football. But we had a new sports centre opened up in Bucksburn, which is just outside Aberdeen. And the first day that it opened, so I just moved to Bucksburn, and this sports centre opened up like 200 meters away, a bit like Bella Houston, I guess, And I went there to play football, but there were so many people that were playing indoor football. I thought, I can't sit around doing nothing. So there was Brian with a couple of tables trying to encourage some of us to come and play. So I went on, and I seem to remember that he played a game against me. I'd never held a bat in my life. I was probably about 11 years old. And he gave me 18 of a start and beat me 21-19 and said I clearly had talent, which I believed, despite getting drubbed 21-1 effectively. And that was it. That word, or that encouragement that he gave me, was what kind of switched me onto table tennis. Something as small as that.
Yeah, and probably this is where we fall down, John, because Brian Keane tells a similar story. He came across it by accident, and other people have. I'm just going to move over to Archie to get his original backstory. Archie, how did you're not in Zimbabwe, are you? No, you're in sunny Glasgow on here too. Archie, so how did you get into table tennis?
A bit like John, you know, my only interest was football. I think we support the same team, John, which we won't mention. But anyway, at age 11 or 12, my brother was a table tennis coach, John, who's obviously on the Zoomcast as we speak. And it was John who, and I think it was initially a place called Gearbraid Church, he took me to. I think that was the first time I ever hit a table tennis ball. But then I developed onto Cadder Youth Club, which is where we came from, which is the Mary Hill area, in case anybody doesn't know. So that was how I started playing. And it was Youth Club table tennis initially, before I moved on to Knightswood Community Centre, which was a great experience for me at the time. And we spent every Sunday, all day Sunday there for several years, which was fantastic experience and practice for me. But I did eventually go out of it, to be honest. You know, the standard, I had to search for a better standard to improve personally. One thing I would say is that the first time, and it was John who took me to the competition, I almost gave up after my first competition. It took me along to the Falkirk it was, and at that time I was playing youth club table tennis, so I had no idea how good I was, how bad I was. And after winning a couple of games in the juniors, I played this girl, and I lost her. And I was absolutely ill. I decided that's it. I'm finished. I'm not as good as I thought I was, until several people came along and said, by the way, what a game that was. You did well there. And I'm thinking, what do you mean? I just lost to a girl. It turned out to be Elaine Smith Forbes. And it really was. It actually, when I look back in it, the whole hall had actually stopped because it was such a good game. So it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. That was my start. And from there, I grew as a player.
I just chip in there.
I
wondered if you would remember that, David. We were through at Falkirk, and he had won a few games, and I'd be keeping an eye on him. And the hall was full of tables. I was called to a table, and I was playing a match. And there was a tremendous noise of cheering and shouting coming from the end of the hall. And it was disturbing everybody else's table, till eventually everyone stopped playing. At that point, I get the opportunity to look back to see who it was. And it turned out to be Archie and Elaine. And it's all too easy to make a story up, but it did go to the deciding end, and it was 21-19 to Elaine. She won, and the whole hall just erupted. The other thing I would say is I think Archie was a bit younger than he's saying, because I think he started at Gearbraid Church probably about the age of 9 or 10. I used to go there to practice because I was working on a Saturday morning, and I'd go there in the afternoon. And I think the conversation at home was, John, I'd like to go out shopping this afternoon. Can you take Archie with you? And I think I said something along the lines of, I'd be delighted, Mum. So that's how it started.
Yeah.
Okay, right. I'm going to stop now.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring Mark in. We'll stop the story there because obviously there is an international story. But I'll start with Mark, and then I'd like John if he's got a question for Archie, and Archie if he's got a question for John. But Mark first. Anything on the backstories?
Well, so very, very quickly, me and Archie got something in common. I played against Elaine in the Dundee League last year in a Memorial Hall in St Andrews. And I beat her best of 5. I beat her 3 straight, but I think I had a few years on her. But we have something in common, Archie.
That's a different story to mine, to be fair, Mark.
So my question, gents, and it's to all of you, it's the two Johns and Archie, was that as being the young person on the group tonight, not the old timer, even though I'm getting close to vets in table tennis, I wanted to understand the community of table tennis, because I mean, one thing being get a bit more historian and the guests that we've had, there seems to be a sense of community of the people that you met, and especially this old timers page, is that there's friendships that seem to be formed, and then how many 40 years later or 30 years later, whatever it is, they're still there. So, I mean, starting with John in Botswana, how was the community playing in Aberdeen? Was the friends that you formed and the club and basically playing in a club? How did you enjoy it? Did it basically really get you into the game that you wanted to explore it more?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. You know, you land up. You know, the first ambition. It's funny going back to Archie's story about losing at Falkirk. My first experience of a proper table tennis tournament was Falkirk as well, and I got beaten in the first round, not by a girl, but by somebody from my own club, which really, let me say, angered me somewhat, and it gave me the ambition. I came out with a strategy after that I was never going to lose in the first round of any tournament again. That was my approach to life. After going all the way to Falkirk and losing one in the first game, no doubles, and going back to Aberdeen late at night, I thought, nah, if this happens, then I'm going to also pack up like Archie getting beaten by a girl.
No.
But the sense of camaraderie, yes.
Oh, sorry, John. Archie, have you got a question for John?
Question for John?
Yeah, it don't matter if you haven't. If you have, great. If you haven't, no problem.
No, I've not.
I mean, Archie, what about just obviously your sense of growing up, sort of like playing table tennis in Glasgow, having your brother there? Did it give you that, obviously, that community side, or, I mean, community is probably the wrong word, but it's that sense of belonging to something?
Listen, see, in the 70s, so many friends in the 70s, but it was very, very competitive. I mean, I left Knightswood in 1973 to join Mulgai Table Tennis Club. And my main objective was to stop the domination of Central Table Tennis Club, because Central had completely dominated for a number of years with John Molson, Davy Fraser, Ram Bala, who's currently the over 80s European champion, I believe, Davy McElroy, Russell Brown, Tosh Devers. So that was my objective. So I joined Mulgai, and these guys were mostly all friends, but I joined Mulgai, and it was a really, really close knit community. It was Ian Hay, Charlie Brown, who's still about, John McIntosh, Kenny McLean, who's come back, and it was a several years. It took us several years, to be fair, but eventually in around about 78, 77, 78, we toppled them, which was, for me, it was my objective for a number of years. And in the same year, I won the Scottish closed and top of the averages. So I reached a peak, and they eventually asked me to join Central, which for me was quite humorous. But to get back to where we were, it was a great thing, and all these guys at Central were all friends, so we'd socialise together. I mean, for example, on a Friday night, we'd all go over for a beer after several hours of practice. Same thing on a Sunday from Bellahouston. We're all very close, very, very close.
Archie, did I hear that right? After a game, you all went at an ice bath and a stretch and a cycle.
David, you weren't about. It was the 70s. It was the 70s. You weren't about. Remember, back in those days, there was no nutrition advice whatsoever, and nobody said, "Don't go for a pint, Archie." Nobody.
I definitely played table tennis in the wrong era. I think I would have excelled in the 70s.
Yeah, you know, actually, our story even gets more similar, because I don't know if you guys remember Alan Matthew, who's a great junior player. And so Alan and I wanted to join. There were two big clubs in Aberdeen. There was YM Swifts and there was Triangle A. And neither of us could get a game with Triangle A. So we formed the team called Triangle B, along with a guy called Roger Clark. And long and short, the first year we were in the first division, we won it. So we beat Swift and Triangle A, and then we won it the second year. And then at some stage we moved to YM Swifts, Alan, myself, to play with Brian, and then we won the league again. So that was a very satisfying era. Michael Thompson, Robert Thompson, and Charlie Matthew were Triangle A, but they would never make Alan, myself, in the A team. We never played for Triangle A. We only played for Triangle B.
Wow.
And these guys, by the way, all went for a beer with me at these open competitions. The guys
Yeah.
you're mentioning. So they were no different from me.
No.
It was just a couple of beers.
Okay, right. I'm going to go back to you, Archie. I want the breakthrough. Obviously, you're playing, you've been to Falkirk, you're a young lad, but there was a breakthrough when you would have become like a national. When I talk about breakthrough, is actually playing either junior international, or you thought, wow, I'm on the up.
Well, I think the first time I kind of made a breakthrough was, I remember, I think as a 14-year-old, I reached the semi-final. I was at Springburn Sports Centre, and I reached the semi-final of the Scottish Juniors. And it was a big lad called David Charlson, who I think sadly passed away, I believe, who beat me juice it again. It was 19 or juice in the third, but he went on to win it. And for me, I thought I had him beat, and that was a big breakthrough for me. So I went on to win it twice after that, the Scottish Junior singles. So and there was a big disappointment there. The first time I went to play in a European youth for Scotland was Thornaby. A place called Thornaby was the first time I went. During my first game, I sprained my wrist. That was a nightmare, honestly, an absolute nightmare. And I was just a young boy at the time. I'd be, I think, 14, and I had to just watch the rest of it. I was absolutely sick. But you know, that was a big disappointment. Having said that, I did do Athens, and it was with the person. I think two of the lads that John's just mentioned, Charlie Matthews and Alan Matthews. I think we're both there with me in Athens.
Didn't you all get banned, Archie?
We all get banned.
Some of you did.
Your memory's better than mine. I've been banned a few times, but I don't remember this one.
What was that? You played in a band, Archie?
I think
we've got youngsters watching this. You played in a band.
I think that's
right, John.
Yeah.
And your breakthrough?
Well, mine was a bit different. I remember the sort of emotional or mental breakthrough was when I was about 14 or 15, being invited to play in the Scottish senior table tennis squad at the training camp in, I think it was Springburn Primary or something. And, you know, I was in awe of some Richard Jewell, Davy Fraser, people like that. And my first knock was with Davy Fraser, who I think had just beaten Richard in the Scottish closed. So I was so nervous, even just to practice against him. But that sort of gave me different ambitions. So it wasn't so much playing through tournaments, although it was being selected at such a young age to go and play with the senior players at Springburn. That was I'll never forget that.
Can I hand over to Mark now, because I remember inviting a young Mark Lundberg to train with the seniors. Can you remember that?
Dave, exactly that thought went in my head there. I mean, we're in sync with such a good team doing this. But that was my breakthrough. That was you inviting me and Gavin Rumgay to play with the senior squad. And then actually it was a month later, I think it was the assessment or senior assessment where I finished 8th, where I finished quite high up. But I think that's a good breakthrough, young John, as we call you, of when you get to play with senior players. It does bring your game up that little bit level. And I think we're talking about different eras, but I think that remains the same throughout sport, where it's a good thing, especially training camps, and you see how they train or how they approach the game. So it's a good memory, Dave.
Yeah. And the thing I would say to John Jr., that sounds good, doesn't it, John Jr.? Obviously, you were practicing with David Fraser, who was better than you. So it was important that David Fraser had a practice partner who was better than him. So it's got to be a bit. I mean, we can't always practice with players who are better than us, because if we did, then nobody'd have a practice partner. So the organising of these sessions is, it's quite a task. Right, now, what I want to ask you both, John and Archie, and birthday John, is did you stay with us? Did the coaches say, right, off you go now, I've taught you as much as I can, or did you change coaches, or did you stick with your same coach? I'll start with John Jr.
Yeah, right. So my story with Brian Morgan. So Brian was ranked at one stage, I think, about 8 in Scotland seniors.
Yeah.
And I can't remember exactly when it was, but I played him. He used to always beat me in tournaments and beat me mostly in practice as well. So he was coaching me twice a week, and I was rising up the ranks in Aberdeen, but I hadn't beaten him. And then I can't remember which tournament it was, but one day I beat him in a semi-final of one of the Aberdeen tournaments, and that was the last time. Well, he never beat me again from then. It might have been about the same time as I started attending the Scottish training camps. So from there we used to practice together, but I didn't really have another coach apart from the likes of Brian Keane, the coaches that were at the camps in Inverclyde and the Guinness School of Sport,
Yeah, of course. And did you still, was Brian still a good coach for you, even though you'd overtaken him as a player? Or
not such a good coach, but he did encourage me and felt that I could go through the ranks and do pretty well. So
I mean, what we've spoken about too. Sorry, John.
He kept encouraging me
on these sessions is that sometimes the coaches have to. I mean, well, I coach tennis, but when players get to a certain standard, then I pass them on, and I'm pleased to pass them on. So Brian taking you to that level and you moving on. Right. So Archie, did you stick with John, or did the relationship change, or as a coach?
My story is kind of similar to John's, young John's, because old John, and I'm pleased to say that, and I don't often get the opportunity to say old John was my coach for the first 3 or 4 years of my table tennis career. But we kind of drifted away for various reasons. We're playing different places, practicing different places. So, to be honest, he was probably the last coach I ever had. Yeah. I would say I was pretty much self-coached for the rest of my career. As John says, with the odd exception of, the odd word of wisdom from somebody in the Scottish squad training. Apart from that, I was on my own. Yeah. There were some good coaches about in Scotland, but they were mainly, especially the west of Scotland, Andy Fleming, who's very, very well known. There was Dick Alexander, but they were mainly coaches for the youngsters. So once you achieve a certain level, it was difficult to get somebody to coach you.
Yeah. Okay, John. Birthday.
I don't think in Aberdeen.
Sorry, young John first, then.
In Aberdeen, I don't remember there being any coaches apart from the one I had. To be honest, Brian. There were players who helped and coached, but Brian, was a very good coach. So I was really fortunate, to fall under his mentorship at a very early age. It made a lot of difference.
Yeah. And John, this is birthday, John. You was obviously coaching at the time. Would you have the guys got it about right? Coaches were few and far between, and did you feel your relationship with Archie was changing as he was beginning to learn a lot by himself, or?
Well, table tennis, my time starting was the 60s. And table tennis there at that time was entirely different from what it is now. And more so in the west of Scotland. West of Scotland at that time had lost just about all its top players. And there was a young group coming through like Jimmy Dow, Peter Cameron, George Anderson, who had all been practicing at one point at Taylor Street. Now, I was young playing, didn't have a coach really, but the people in the youth club was three different people. There was Joe Mitchell, who played for Hamilton Cross alongside Harry Baxter and Gordon Fraser, and they had been the West of Scotland champions 2 or 3 times. And then another night was a chap called John Hannah. He was the oldest of the group, and John turned out to be the secretary of the West of Scotland League. And another night there was somebody we called Mr. Pratt. But such was that deferential era, I never knew him as anything else than Mr. Pratt, which is unfortunate. And what happened there was that John Hannah said to me, look, son, why don't you come along on a Friday night or a Saturday morning to Taylor Street? So I went along as the sole representative or member of that youth club and practiced there. I always talk very fondly about Taylor Street. It was quite an unusual hall. Where it was sited is now where the Strathclyde University Sports Centre is. Downstairs had a concrete floor and upstairs had a wooden floor. And there was maybe about 3, 4, 5 tables in each level. Now, the older guys had been playing for years, played with hard bats. They all made their way upstairs, where it was a slower bounce, slower movement for the wooden floor. And the younger guys were all making their way to the ground level. Now, the Saturday morning sessions, which included John Hawkins and various other people, I got to the stage where I was leading that group. So there I was playing youth in the youth club with these 3, let's say, coaches or leaders. And at the same time, Taylor Street closed to be redeveloped, and our youth club closed because we were going to build a brand new custom-built youth club. And just like any building anywhere, it went 2 or 3 years behind schedule. No telephone, no contact with anyone, so I was out the game for a couple of years. Then that youth club opened, and there was one coach came along, and it was Liam McKeating. And Liam was entirely different from everyone else. Don't get me wrong, Joe was a good player, John Hannah was very helpful, and but Liam got in amongst us all, not necessarily to play table tennis, but he got to know us all. And before we knew it, he was taking us to his club, not only from that youth club, but from another youth club where Jerry Doak joined him. So it was an entirely different time. Coaching was almost non-existent. I think the first bit of coaching I got was from a Teach Yourself book. I forget who wrote it, but I think that's the first time I saw it. And then, as I say, no coaching, and we didn't know how to practice either. And it's sheer by sheer chance that Jerry and I sort of redesigned our own patterns, or they call them drills now. And we did that, and we started that, and we were one of the few groups. And when Archie joined us, he joined us for the same sessions. And one of the places we liked to practice was Glasgow University, because I was coaching Glasgow University in the late 60s. And what we used to do there is gauge our thinking in hours. So if it was me, Archie, and Jerry, I'd practice we'd go in with a stroke we wanted to improve. So I'd practice with Archie for 20 minutes. Archie would practice with Jerry for 20 minutes then, and that was how it went. And then we tried to keep ourselves fit in between times. But there was no environment where a coach took you in hand or you actually learned to play the game properly. We're self-taught.
Okay. It's interesting, John mentioning Liam McKeating, because Ian Stokes, if you've seen the Friends and Rivals session, he spoke in glowing terms of Liam, and he said he didn't just make you a better table tennis player. He said he made you a better person. And cool, what a great coach.
Perfectly
Mark,
true. Sorry.
Yeah, Mark, anything for the two boys? Because I'm going to move them on to playing for the national seniors.
Yeah, no. So I just wanted to pick up on the whole coaching element. So our previous guests that we've had, I mean, Brian Keane in particular has talked about that it was all about match play. So when you're practicing, you used to just play matches. So it'd be like, as we call it, top table now, or a ladder, but you play everyone in the hall and play matches. But to Archie and young John, it's even confusing. You can't even say Mr. McCulloch because you'd still be like, which one it is? Which one are you talking about? But to Archie and to John, what was your practice? I mean, obviously, senior John has talked about creating drills in his own practice. But what did you want to do? Did you just want to play games as practice? Or was it a case of I'm going to work on my game, or I need to work on my backhand, or and all that type of thing? Archie?
Well, in early days, like John said, it was good to have, the patterns, the pattern practice. It was good to do that. But it was so unlike actual match situation. And I'll just mention, there was an old friend of mine who, and I'm not too sure what he actually won in terms of paraplegic competition, but he was certainly one of the best in the world in a wheelchair. John might remind us at some point in time, but Neil McDonald, his name was.
McDonald.
And Neil, he had a flat and a Stiga robot in Botanic Gardens in Glasgow. And Neil would ask me over to give him a bit of practice if he had a big competition on. And he would deliberately say, Archie, Stiga robot, I'm fine with the Stiga robot. I need to practice against an individual. Now, what I want you to do is play off the angles. So he would ask me deliberately, he says, look, I might be up in one wheel or whatever. Just forget about it. This is what I want. This is what I need. So invariably, he was up in one wheel in his wheelchair trying to retrieve the ball. And that was great practice. That was great for him. And it'd be the same for me. It doesn't match, the pattern stuff doesn't match what happens in a real match environment. So it's good to a degree.
Yeah.
Can I butt in and tell you a little story about Neil McDonald?
Yeah, no, I want to move on a bit, John. If we get time, I want to go on to breaking through to the senior team, senior national team, John. Junior John, not birthday John.
Yeah, well, I think it led on from representing Scotland at the youth championships in Zagreb in 1975, and then managed to get the points rankings to about, I think, 3 or 4, and got selected to play the European Championships in Duisburg in 1978. And before that, I think actually we were both at the Commonwealth Games. Was that 77 or 78?
77, John, yeah.
77. So it was,
Guernsey.
Yeah, it was tournament after tournament. So we had the Commonwealth Games in Edinburgh, and that was just a great event. Imagine you get selected for the Commonwealth Games and it's your home country. Then they made up for it in 1979 by sending us to Pyongyang. Yeah. So I played in the European Championships in 78, the World Championships 79, and in a game that I shouldn't really mention, against a relegation match against Belgium in Brussels, somewhere about that time as well, where I didn't do too well apart from winning a game with Richard in the doubles, and we got relegated.
John, did you get a chance to see Des in Duisburg? Because it was fantastic, wasn't it, that tournament? Des Douglas.
I played against Des Douglas at the Humberside Open. Yeah. Again, somewhere around about that team, and I remember he played one shot against me that I actually didn't know where the ball was. I didn't even think it hit the table. It's one of the fastest shots where you don't actually see it.
Yeah,
and I'm looking around, and then I saw the ball in the bottom of the surrounds, and I assumed it had hit the table, but I couldn't tell for sure. I'd never seen a ball hit so early and so quickly past me. What an experience,
Yeah. Did you watch?
So yeah, I've seen that a few times.
Yeah. In Duisburg when it was fantastic, when he went the whole team of them without losing a game, then losing. Yeah. John, Archie should have said your debut for Scotland seniors. and making the breakthrough?
Well, my first year as a senior, it was a disappointment for me, although I did quite well. But the Scottish closed. That was a year that I think John was referring to earlier on, when David Fraser won it. He actually, most people think he beat Richard in the final, but it was me he beat in the final. He'd beaten Richard in the semi.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was an opportunity for me, which I missed out on, because, as you know, Richard's very, very difficult to beat. David's another kettle of fish, and he was playing particularly well on the day and beat me in the final. But getting to the final, the Scottish closed kind of helped me get into the Scottish squad. So I was in the squad for quite some time. I played Commonwealths, as John mentioned, in Guernsey, and I played the Worlds at Birmingham, 1977. That was a year where everyone had to play with a Halex ball, which is, as you all know, is very soft, and there was a lot of complaints, and not just soft, but not round. And then 79, John mentioned again, was the Commonwealths in Edinburgh, which was a fantastic occasion. And moving on to the Worlds, which I think we'll maybe touch on later, at Pyongyang. But apart from that, there were other great occasions. I played French Open, Belgian Open, English Opens. I played a Grand Prix TV production of the Home Internationals, where I played on TV against Dennis Neal. There was a friendly at Inverclyde against China, which involved Liang, which was a fantastic occasion.
Defender.
And I think Eric Sutherland, from what I hear, was the man responsible for that. I don't know how he did it, but it was a great experience. Yeah. So that was my breakthrough and seniors.
Funnily enough, guys, Archie, when I went to Zimbabwe in '83, I won the Zimbabwe Open '83, '84, and '85, and in 1982, Koyowa beat Liang Ko-Liang in the final. Yeah, and then I won it I won it the next 3 years.
Yeah, there you are.
The fact nobody knows that they weren't there when I was there.
Yeah. I'm going to ask Mark at this stage, because I want to learn about Pyongyang, and then I'm going to ask Birthday John to his reflections on their rise to international table tennis. Mark, anything for the two guys?
So I very quick, I want to touch upon it, just a comparison between, I'm talking about an era where you watch table tennis now, a click of a button, you can watch table tennis. You just had the recent tournament, the World Table Tennis Tour in Doha, where you could watch every match. Go on YouTube now. Actually, all of yours, go and watch it. Some of the rallies are unbelievable. But how did you watch good table tennis players? Dave touched upon it with Des Douglas in '77. But when you were at the tournament and the Chinese players, how did you basically try to inspire yourself by watching top table tennis players? Were you proactive in going to watch? Because I think of the young players now, and we've had a lot of young guests on here, and they have inspirations and the work that Table Tennis Scotland's doing through Stephen Gerstin and online, but it's such an important part of table tennis now is going to watch top class players through the internet. But what about in your era? Archie, starting with you, did you have any inspiration, or what did you go and watch, or did any players that stood out for you and you thought, wow?
Well, as a young lad, the player that really stood out for me was Malcolm Sugden. What a player Malcolm Sugden is! The speed he moved about that table was incredible. Malcolm moved down to, I believe, Middlesex to improve his table tennis. But he was the guy I really looked at initially. And then once I started playing international table tennis, Stellan Benson was the guy who stood out for me. But the strange thing is, back then there was very little emphasis on serving. If you look at all the videos of what happened in the '70s, they were basically just putting the ball on the table. There was very, very little emphasis on it at all compared to now. But and when after I stopped playing, the guy who stood out for me was Waldner. He's for me, he's a class.
My favourite, Archie. Well done.
Mr. Block. You know, you just can't get the ball past him. But these were my inspirations. Yeah.
So I had the English Open in Brighton at the Dome, and what was it, the Corn Exchange?
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah. And Dennis George was the manager, and I was fairly young, I guess. We travelled down via Ormsby. We played at Ormsby in the middle of this, which was another interesting experience. But when we got to the English Open, one of my memories of that first tournament was Dennis George going to, was it Stanislav Gamoskov, who would have been in the top 10 in the world, Russian, with probably the best, along with Stepanchik, the best backhand in the world. And Dennis George organized, because he knew my backhand was rubbish, and he organized for me to have a knock-up with Gamoskov.
Wow. At
the English Open, maybe only a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
And it was another wow experience, and he played against me for a couple of minutes. It was another inspiring moment,
Excellent. John?
My favorite.
A birthday, John.
My favorite player was Johansson, followed closely by Surbeck.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you that again, because I want to. Yeah, I'll come back. I'm going to ask you that again, because I'm going to ask you why. But I've got that later on. Birthday, John. Anything? The guys are now they've almost hit Pyongyang. Any reflections?
The one thing that comes to mind is when you have a close relative playing and under your charge, it can be very, very nerve-wracking. You hear managers say, I was more nervous. That's the way it was. And back when Archie was playing as a kid, there were no minors and there were no cadets. Now, from all he's been telling you about how he represented Scotland at junior level, there is absolutely no question he would have a lot more representative honours at minors and cadets, because he was always there or thereabouts, and he got picked for the junior team when he was nowhere near the top age group. And watching him, I don't know how many quarterfinals or semi-finals I saw him play a couple of lads from, I think it was Perth, maybe Dundee, but was McGilvery and McNaughton. And the thing that stands out was the difference in height. These two lads were 6-footers, and Archie was somewhere about 4 feet. And you see this, and he used to go back and defend against a high lob, and I'd be standing at the sides there screaming at him to get into the table. But I think John Moyer's very much the same boat. They came through quickly, but you didn't see how good they were really against their own age group, but they always showed up well at a slightly higher age group. So I think table tennis now benefits from minors and cadets where they didn't used to. Yeah. Talking of the English Open, I too managed to get entered for the English Open in 1973. So I was down there too.
Corn Exchange.
The Corn Exchange, and it was Stellan Bengtsson who won. But I can tell you I made round 2 though.
Yeah. Right, because I definitely wanted to, it sounds you're having a fantastic time, but you're about to give up table tennis, but I want to go to Pyongyang. And Mark, have you got anything for the guys before we go to the Worlds in Pyongyang in '79?
No, I think just a quick reflection. I think hearing these stories about what table tennis brought you, of travelling around Europe, even in England, the players that have come across, I feel sorry, obviously in lockdown at the moment, the young players, but even more so, I think there's inspiration there where we can look at young players in Scottish table tennis, where what can we do to try and get back to these days that the gentlemen are mentioning, our guests are mentioning, because the experience of what table tennis has brought them sounds fantastic. So it's just a reflection of what's been said so far. It gives us inspiration.
Yeah, Mark, I've noticed we've got a little bit on the chat. Do you want to pick up any questions?
Yeah. I'll go to, because I think we'll cover off after Pyongyang, Kieran Walker's question, so we'll come back to that last. Yeah. But just a very quick point on equipment. I actually had this written down as a question, but Joan Smith up in Shetland, just a question about equipment, about what rubbers or the type of bat that you used, because you weren't in that era. Was it 1980? Was it John Hilton? Was that 1980?
Yeah.
So obviously, you just getting finished, but before that, leading up with sponge rubbers into, like you went through that era of hardback into sort of sponge being introduced. But Archie, what sort of rubbers are your equipment back then?
No swearing, actually.
There were two different bats I played with, a Mark 5, and I moved on to a Shriver.
Yeah.
But and you mentioned John Hilton. I mean, the what we called at the time, it's anti-spin now, but what we called at the time, long pimples, was a huge bugbear for me. Absolutely huge. You know, it enabled average players to compete against the top players, as far as I'm concerned. And it's a real bugbear in that, you know, if something like that happened in golf or tennis, it would never have been, it would have been stopped right away. You know, it was absolutely disgraceful. There should have been some sort of controlling the type of rubber. I mean, for anybody that doesn't know, long pimples, if you play a shot, you get back a spin which you don't expect. So the rallies were much shorter than they had been before because people didn't understand the spin. It made it terrible to watch TV, right at a time when television was looking for new sports. You know, Channel 4 was just coming out and looking for new sports, and basically as a sport to watch on TV, long pimples or anti-spin killed it completely. And John, for anybody who doesn't know, John Hilton, he mastered it by attacking and mixing his game a wee bit, and he beat. I believe he was 1,000-1 winner of the European Championship.
Well, the thing that Dave's used, Archie, was he wasn't even the best player in this county.
It was at the time, because it was sort of, in fairness, he did play well in Duisburg, so he could play the game. He had a good, but by the time he won the European Championships, it was number 1 in Europe. It was number 2 in England, number 3 in Lancashire, number 4 in Manchester. Number 5 in Manchester YMCA, because they all know how to beat him then. Anyway, John Jr., what were you playing with? Shriver Mark 5 on an Elsa blade, a Johansson blade?
I can't remember. A Johansson blade, I think, at one stage with Mark 5 initially on both sides, and then possibly Shriver or something on the back end. I played against John Hilton it might have been the Commonwealth Games when he was twiddling that bat, and it was the same color rubber, and I'm glad nobody was filming that match because the expletives, I just couldn't work out what was going on. I mean, he was a good player for sure, but I had no clue how to play against that. It was the first time I'd come across it.
Well, Joe, that's another thing we have in common. I played John Hilton at Blackpool Grand Prix, and I think I beat him. I can't be 100% sure, but I think I did. But if you think of how many years later, and I was maybe 18. So another thing we have in common this evening.
Yeah.
But what John played with, this is for Joan, because obviously as you could see, you were basically Mark 5 and Shriver. But John played with tackiness on one side and then Tony Old on the other. So he had the black anti-spin on both sides, and he could hit with it and he could push with it. So before, I know we're running out of time, but that's always a good thing. So I do want to go on to Pyongyang, because that was where everything changed. Shortly after that, you both decided that you was going to move out of table tennis. So who wants to go first?
Just very quickly, Dave, I think it's quite ironic or quite a good thing where Gavin Rumgay, our number 1 player, publicised his trip to Pyongyang. And here we are, we have 2 guests that played table tennis in Pyongyang, and I don't think we picked up on that reference before we went into tonight.
Wow.
So I think it's quite a good thing.
Right, who wants to go first? Pyongyang.
Just as a wee build up. Sorry, John, do you want to go first? That's fine.
Yeah, I'll go first, and then you can add the
meaty stuff.
And I'll go and get a glass of wine, you know.
The water was that, John. My hearing's bad. A glass of ice water.
Pyongyang was an experience, but one of the build up, the sad things, and you know, Archie and I have discussed this, but just before the reason, or as far as I understand, that the reason that North Korea was allowed to hold the World Table Tennis Championships or the world anything was that they showed no bias against the Americans, the South Koreans, and I think the Israelis were included, that, you know, they mustn't prevent them getting to North Korea to play. And the South Korean team had come to Scotland to train with us before the competition. Their women team was possibly in the top 3 in the world, if I remember right, and the men's team wasn't far behind it. So they had been training for years and years and years. Imagine South Korea going to North Korea. And then you probably know the story of this, but we left Inverclyde, headed to Geneva, where we were supposed to get a transit visa via, where was it? Like China or somewhere like that. Everything was changed, and suddenly we were flying to Moscow, Novosibirsk, Irkutsk, and down to Pyongyang. And as I understand it, the South Korean team was refused, and the Israeli team was refused transit visas across Russia. So that was their tournament over before they got there. So there was some real dirty politics going on, and we left the South Korean team at Geneva. We were getting on the plane to go up to Moscow, and it was a very emotional time because we'd grown close to these guys. I'd given away my Scottish tracksuit to one of them and was told to go and get it back, but I swapped my tracksuit with one of the South Korean players. So that was the lead up to Pyongyang.
Yeah. So you arrive in Pyongyang, Archie. What about it?
As John just said, all the European nations arrived at the same time, and for some reason we decided we're all staying in the same hotel. It was I think it was about 20 stories high, and we all stayed in the same hotel.
There only was one hotel actually.
Was it, John? Yeah, we were all staying in it.
One hotel only.
So anyway, we threw our bags in the room and decided to go for a walk down the main street. And I mean, the reaction we got for the locals was just absolutely incredible. You know, we felt as if we were aliens. You know, they're running away from us. You know, running across the road. It was unbelievable. So that was our first experience walking down that road. Having said that, you know, it didn't happen very often after that because we had a guide stroke interpreter who made sure that we didn't do that again. You know, he was trying to keep us next to him. And to be fair, they did take us to some beautiful places, you know, Pyongyang Circus, Pyongyang Zoo, you know, and where I clapped a panda. Actually, you know, health and safety reasons, you know, obviously wouldn't be allowed here, but there were some beautiful places. But we were being kept away from, you know, the deprivation that existed there. So, and I won't go into detail in this story, but we managed to lose the interpreter. And I see you smiling, John, young John, because we basically embarrassed him. We basically embarrassed him without getting into too much detail. And through the embarrassment, he would disappear. And it gave us the opportunity to go looking about the city. And I don't know if that was a good thing or not, because the deprivation was horrendous. It really was horrendous. And just to give you a picture of what the people were like, you know, everyone, men and women, had a badge on their lapel with the, and this is the way they said it, our glorious leader, the great Kim Il-sung. You know, that's the way they said his name, and at every occasion, if you asked him to repeat it, he would say, our glorious leader, the great Kim Il-sung. So the people were absolutely, having said that, you know, they appeared to be very happy. They appeared to be, because it's all they knew. The food is horrendous. I mean, I lost nearly a stone. I remember the first morning going for breakfast, and I looked about and thought, oh, what are we going to eat here? And I spotted a boiled egg. And I remember cutting the top off the boiled egg, and it just all fell over the side. They'd obviously frightened it rather than cooking it. So they had no idea how to cook food for us. And I do remember on the way back, I don't know if you remember this, John, the restaurant in Geneva. I think it was the airport, actually. The best meal ever. It was, and it could have been a McDonald's, to be fair, but it was the best meal ever. It was absolutely fantastic. But from a table tennis point of view, Hungary beat China 5-1. One of the greatest games I ever saw in my life. And I don't know if you remember this, John. Do you remember the ladies' final? Where the North Korean girl was the hot favourite.
Yeah.
And she lost, and the hall emptied. The hall
there was
emptied.
about 20,000 people in there, eh?
The 20,000 stadium, and they constantly jeered the Americans and constantly jeered the Japanese, and constantly cheered every single South Korean player. But when she lost the final, they all just disappeared. There was other games going on, but the hall emptied. Incredible.
John, young John, your reflections of Pyongyang?
Yeah, again, very similar. It was weird when you were playing in a match, when if North Korea happened to be playing on one of the 16 tables that were in that hall, they must have bussed people in that knew nothing about table tennis and told them to scream and shout when North Korea won a point, no matter what was going on. So you'd be playing, it'd be absolute silence in that hall, and then suddenly out of the blue, it's complete bedlam, and no real pattern to it. So it was to me, it was very, very difficult getting used to those sort of conditions. Not to mention the odd food, Archie.
John, can I just stop? Can I just, because I know we've got a few questions. Are any of the questions relevant, Mark, at the moment?
There's nothing from basically North Korea. I mean, my only observation was that Nottingham Forest fans must have taken inspiration from the North Korea stadium emptying. But no, there's not. I mean, there are probably questions as we sum up, Dave. But for me, fascinating hearing the gents' accounts of basically.
We had.
What was Kerry? Can you just give a shout to the people who've asked questions then, if they've been covered?
No. So I mean, basically, probably a bit the question that we'll get on to, Dave, was basically about any regrets about their table tennis career. So we
I think I'm looking at the time. Right, guys, you stopped playing more or less after that. Did it run its course, or was there a black moment, or just to change your lifestyle? Young John first.
Yeah, I knew this question was coming, and I'm still struggling to get to terms with what exactly happened. I can't say it was North Korea as such that discouraged me. It didn't. It was an experience, and it's one I'm glad I had. But I think when it got back, 1979, 1980, table tennis in Aberdeen, for whatever reason, was dying or had gone through a real lull. Yeah. It was difficult to find places to play. It was difficult. People were not traveling to the tournaments in Edinburgh and Glasgow, Dundee and Perth. So if you wanted to go, you were going yourself. So I think just that combination of things made me think, I'll give it up, which is basically what happened.
Yeah, and
but it wasn't as a result of North Korea.
No. You obviously took up many other sports as well, didn't you as well? So was that a pull? Was it the darts? Did that start to pull you away, or did that come afterwards?
I think it was running in parallel, but I got a bit more serious about it.
Archie?
My reason is it's a combination of a few things. Certainly, as I mentioned earlier on, the anti-spin rubbers was an issue. And having reached the standard I had, I was struggling to find practice partners of a good enough standard. And I wasn't in a situation where I could travel to find better players, because the third reason was I was just newly married I'd got married not long after I came back from Pyongyang. So the combination of those three things, I think, and the realisation that I may, because I couldn't commit myself the way I could in the past, I may drop down the rankings, not be part of the Scotland squad. And I decided, rather than that happening, because for me the anti-spin was a big issue. Rather than me dropping down the rankings, as I visualised, I would rather just give it up. I regret it now. I wish I had seen it through. As you know, there was controls put in place to fight against the problems of anti-spin. Not enough for me, but they were put in place after I stopped playing. So that was my reason.
Okay, right. I'm going to go back to birthday, John, because the only one who stuck at it. Shame on Archie. Shame on young John, the man who didn't give up. And in all this time, John, you've seen a lot of Scottish champions: Malcolm Sugden, Richard Riol, David Fraser, David Hanna, Ewan Walker, Gavin Rumgay, Craig Howison, Ian Stokes. I've said Ewan Walker twice now. Ewan Walker. Right. If I was to put you on the spot, John, who would you say would a tournament, who was your favourite one, or who did you consider has been the best champion? I'm going to ask you all this, by the way, but I'm going to start with birthday, John. Best Scottish player ever.
That's an easy one for me to answer, and it might come from my age, but for me, it's Malcolm Sugden every time. And he didn't have the same longevity as Richard, didn't get the same number of caps or play the same number of tournaments, didn't win as many national titles as
he won six.
As David Hanna or Ewan Walker, but on his day and in his era, Malcolm Sugden was a class apart.
Okay, right. I've got the same question for Archie.
I think it's the same answer, but it's a tough one. It's a tough one because Richard Riol was a big influence through my table tennis experience. But it is close, and I'll go for Malcolm, to be honest. Tight one, but Malcolm. A lot of the guys I don't know, to be honest. Ian Stokes was a young boy when I remember him. So the rest of the guys I don't really know.
Yeah, but no, that's and John.
Well,
John.
I'm from Aberdeen, so you know who I'm going to go for. Tricky Dicky. But part of that reason is I never saw Malcolm Sugden play, as far as I'm aware.
Did you see? Oh, sorry, John.
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Did you see David Hanno? Had he just started?
He just
succeeded
started,
Richard. Yeah, it was more or less.
Yeah. So Richard, because I mean, obviously I played in Pyongyang with him in the doubles, and we were beating Surbeck and Stepanchik in the first game until I had another wobbly.
Right. Okay, right. What would you closing remarks now from all of you in terms of reflections? What you would advise, or a great career, but it's a short one, or I'll start with, got to be quick now because we are running out of time. I'll start with birthday, John, the man who stuck it through the ages, the writer, supreme. John, reflections on what you've heard tonight, and you've got 30 seconds.
Like most sports, table tennis has changed over that period, but probably changed more than the other sports. I think it's something that it sticks with you for all your life. Sport itself is a split between physical fitness and skill. You don't get to top in table tennis unless you have skill, but the very top is also physically fit. So by staying there, you can use your skill factor in later age and therefore stay in the sport for longer.
Okay, right, I'll go to Archie. What are you going to tell our viewers, Archie?
I think looking back, the things that I regret are perhaps socialising a bit too much, as perhaps John has as well, I'm sure. And there was no nutrition guidance whatsoever. But the thing I would suggest to everybody does is seek out the best practice they possibly can get, seek out better players as much as possible. And if they're in a position to do so, move to find it. As our top players have, as Richard moved to Paris, moved to London, Malcolm Sugden has moved to Middlesex. So I don't know what the rest of the guys have done. I'm sure most of them have moved on to get the practice that they really needed to get to really the top.
Okay, that's good advice. John, Zimbabwe, what are you going to tell our new audience?
I think, you know, the whole journey, although it seems now, especially that you're highlighting it, it was quite a short career, but you know the initial ambitions, they change as you go throughout life. And you know, initially I wanted to play in the first division in Aberdeen, then I wanted to play for the juniors, then I wanted to play for the seniors, then it sort of led on from that. And you had to travel to practice because there were not the facilities to play in those days. You were lucky if you could play twice a week, so that was a huge disadvantage, I would say. But on the other hand, you played against some of the best players in the world. But table tennis for me was a lot more than just the sport and the friendship. It opened doors for me. And I landed up with a fairly reasonable career in IT. And it was through some table tennis activities that got me out of banking, John McCulloch, into my first IT job. And I won't go into that story, but it was a bit of a funny one. But without a doubt, if I hadn't been playing table tennis, I would not be working in technology and doing the things that I've managed to do. So it's opened doors.
Yeah, that's excellent. And also, this is for the viewers. John has put together, if you've not seen it on the website, and so has Archie, a synopsis, and it's a really good read. I was fascinated, but I really enjoyed reading both of their career paths. But they're now both on the website, I think, aren't they, guys? Right, Mark, reflections from an era before you were born.
I touched on it throughout. I think tonight again has just brought to light what a wonderful sport table tennis is. I think we've got different eras, but we have stories and memories and warm memories is what's come across tonight. So there's not much more I can add to that, Dave, because I think our guests tonight have eloquently put what a wonderful game we have and what it can offer you as a person. So I'd probably leave it at that, is that I think I would encourage anyone go back and watch this and watch it again, and especially young players as well. I think they could take something from actually it is just a game. So, but ultimately it can offer you things in life.
So to all the youngsters watching, believe it or not, we do have a lot of youngsters watching. Kieran, who's put in a question, Kieran Walker, he watches regularly, and Ben Hart, lots of youngsters watch. And one of the messages that's coming over is, obviously, table tennis is the platform, but you go to these wonderful places, enjoy the life experience when you go. You can mix the two. It's been a wonderful journey. So, as always, Mark, thanks. And Archie and John, thank you very much indeed. But the biggest thanks tonight goes to Birthday Boy. It was his idea. He put the team together. So, John McCulloch, thank you very much indeed. And good night, everyone. We'll see you next.